Hello, my name's Lizzie. I'm Anglican. In 3 months' time, I'm going to be moving into a convent ready to become a postulant. And this video is the result of several years of me having had to think about actually what is poverty.
I will hold your people in my heart.
For a few months, I was a full-time volunteer with Rough Sleepers in central London. I was given a mattress to sleep on in a shared room, and I only ate the same food that we gave out to homeless people. And I really wanted to identify with the poor and the homeless. And I spent hours each day talking with Rough Sleepers. And I once got talking with a homeless guy about what he thought about the sleep outs that some groups do to raise money and awareness for homeless charities. Like, you know, the kind where a group sleeps outside for a night in sleeping bags to experience something of what it's like to be homeless or to be a rough sleeper. And the guy I was talking to said that he appreciated they were being well-meaning, but he said they weren't actually experiencing anything of what it's like being homeless. He said that being homeless isn't actually about sleeping outside in the cold. It's about lack of friends or family who can help you out or put you up, lack of safety and security, all the ways the system works against you when you don't have a postal address, that kind of thing. Another homeless guy I chatted with explained that lack of choice was what he experienced as being central to homelessness and central to poverty in general. He explained that even though he might be really cold, if someone offered him a warm room for the night, he might actually reject it just so he could exercise some kind of choice rather than always having things done to him. And lots of homeless guys said that at times they'd refused sandwiches offered to them even though they were really hungry, because even more than food, they wanted just to feel a tiny sense of choice or control or power. So it was a number of homeless men and women I chatted with who first taught me that homelessness and poverty are much more about a lack of choice, lack of power, lack of security, lack of control, than they are about lack of home or lack of money. And this reminded me of that phrase that my parents would often repeat when I was growing up. Beggars can't be choosers. The last few years of my life have ended up being like an extended reflection on these words. I've genuinely struggled to find work. I've genuinely had to live on a very low income and depend on benefits at times and food parcels at one point. I've genuinely had to experience how various systems work against you when you're living as a poorer person in our society. Just to give one example, where I live, we have to pay for our electricity using things that look a bit like USB sticks that you take to a newsagent's. But lots of newsagents pretend that their machine's not working because they don't get anything out of providing this service for people. So then you end up having no electricity in your flat and spending a whole day trying to find somewhere that will top up your electricity. So sharing these kinds of experiences have felt like I've been living a bit in solidarity with the poor in a deeper way than just living on a lower income itself. But at the same time, I keep feeling like a fraud in my efforts to live in solidarity with the poor. My degrees haven't been that helpful in me finding work, but I do have an educational background behind me that others don't have, that has the potential to open doors to me. I speak in a certain way. I'm usually able to articulate myself okay, and that means people sometimes treat me better than they might treat others. I've got a friend network and a family network that others don't have. I've got a certain amount of control over my life, and I have a certain amount of choice even within my modest situation. So that phrase that my parents would repeat when I was younger, beggars can't be choosers, shows that I'm not actually that poor in the truest sense of the word, and shows that my desire to live in solidarity with the poor can only go so far in an authentic way. The religious sisters I've spoken with have shown me how this phrase that my parents used to quote is spot on for a better understanding of what poverty is and what the religious vow of poverty is about. And I can see how religious life would have me living in deeper poverty than I am currently doing, living on my own. And I don't necessarily mean having less money or not having my own possessions. although that's part of poverty, like maybe a more superficial part of it. I mean like the deeper thing of losing quite a lot of the choice of my choice and losing control of my life altogether. I suppose you could argue that the vow of poverty in religious life means it's a form of voluntary poverty. You're choosing it. It's not the same as someone who's found themselves homeless, or who's been born into a situation where they have few opportunities, or who happens to live in a country that bears the brunt of climate change. But to what extent does a person choose religious life for themselves? And someone entering religious life, aren't they ultimately submitting to letting go of choice? Actually, isn't that what Jesus chose to do? To let go of choice, to become completely vulnerable, to live in solidarity with the poor by being subject to the same lack of control, the same being dominated by oppressive regimes, the same being a victim of a corrupt system. Actually, my thinking about the poverty of Jesus' submission, or the submission side of poverty, opened up a whole different reflection on a more kind of spiritual side of poverty. So yeah, poverty is a lot about lack of choice and control over your life, but on the flip side, I saw that you can live out a kind of poverty by abstaining from your preferred choice or your needing to be in control. I realised that there were times in my day when I could somehow practice a kind of virtue of poverty by things like not voicing my opinion unless I felt God specifically encouraging me to, or trying not to butt in when other people are speaking, or refraining from having to have the last word, or submitting to other people's choices or preferences. Obviously, God asks us to use our brains, and there are times when it's important to speak out and not be submissive, which Jesus also did. But in little ways in my day, in conversation or in tasks, I saw that I could try to practice a kind of poverty that was more like tiny occasions of restraint. And I think that's just one part of a whole subject of spiritual poverty, that might include things like completely abandoning ourselves to God, and things like God making us aware of our own inner poverty. But anyway, going back to that phrase, beggars can't be choosers. The head of a religious community was telling me a few weeks ago that she mainly sees her vow of poverty as a kind of identification and sharing with all those in our society and around the world who live with little choice and with powerlessness over their lives. And she also opened my eyes to the fact that although it might look like in entering religious life you're entering quite a secure situation, you know you'll be fed, you've got a bed, you might live in a nice and sizable building, insecurity is always a part of religious life. You don't know what the future holds for your community, you're having to trust God for the finances to sustain the community. And as a religious sister, you're basically open to being sent anywhere. You might get sent to a different house within your community or your order, or the whole community might have to uproot and move. I actually knew a Dominican friar who lived in Leicester for quite a while, and suddenly, almost overnight, his order asked him to move to elsewhere in the country, and he had to go just like that. In that sense, I also see religious life, and this is what this sister was saying, as an identification and solidarity with people who are, for example, living in war zones, who have to leave their homes overnight, or with the asylum seeker or the person on benefits who gets relocated across the country by the Home Office or the council. And yeah, Jesus lived in that kind of poverty too.